My grandfather told her this wonderful quote. He said, "I would rather have a baby on my pillow than forever on my heart." The reality is, it is traumatic. It is something awful. It is something that the woman didn't want to happen to her. Every baby has a right to live a wonderful life. My name is Mary Rathke, and my husband Todd is a dentist here in Bay City. We have 4 children, and I'm very involved in the community. I help out with the homeless shelter and a women's pregnancy care center in my local church, and I also get a chance to speak, and I'm very honored to be able to come here tonight and tell you my own birth story, my life story. My story actually begins in Germany over 100 years ago. In the early 1900s, my grandparents met and they fell in love, and they had this ideal picture of life. They would get married and have children. Well, after about 2 years of marriage, they never were able to conceive, and the doctors told them that they probably wouldn't be able to have children, so they decided to adopt. They adopted a little girl, and after she was about 2 years old, my grandmother got pregnant. And she got pregnant, and she got pregnant, and she got pregnant again. My mother, actually, Ursula, was number 14. She was the 14th child. My mother, Ursula, adopted me, and so adoption has always been in the family. And she actually asked her dad at one point, she said, "You know, back then I know that they had the ability to abort babies. What made you decide to continue to have so many children? You know, why didn't you abort me?" My grandfather told her this wonderful quote. He said, "I would rather have a baby on my pillow than forever on my heart." So she grew up in Germany during World War II, actually. She was about 12 years old when the war started. And because of the war, soldiers came into town, and she fell in love with an American soldier. 2 years after the war ended, she found herself in Berlin, and with the help of the American Red Cross, was able to come to America and get married. She was living what she thought was this wonderful dream, marrying an American, coming here. They quickly began having children themselves. The only thing is, after a while, she realized that he wasn't the ideal man she thought she was marrying, and they began to have a rocky marriage. But she ended up having 5 children and thought, nope, I'm here, I'm married, I've got these kids, I'm going to make the best of it. So when her oldest was about 11 years old and her youngest was about 11 months old, her husband decided they should go on vacation for the summer. So they decided he wanted to go back up to these cabins up north, and she had this really bad feeling. She just was like, I just don't know about this. I just feel like maybe we shouldn't go on vacation this year. And he was like, no, I've been working hard, I've got this vacation pay, I really want to take the kids and the family and go and relax. And so she decided, well, if we go back to that same place we went last time, I know the owners, I know the people in the area, I feel comfortable. If we can get that same cabin we had last time, maybe it'll be all right. So he said, all right. So he called, made the arrangements, and the day came for them to travel to go up to this cabin, to go on vacation. And the whole way up there, my mother is just having this knot in her stomach. And she's just feeling like, I just feel like something bad's gonna happen, and maybe we're gonna have a car accident. So she was on the edge of her seat the entire way there, being, I'm sure, a horrible back driver. Stop, what are you doing? There's a car coming. I'm sure she was doing that a lot. But thankfully, they made it safe to the cabins without a car accident. And so she was relieved. She's just like, thank goodness, we're here, we're safe. And as they began putting the kids to bed that night and closing up the cabin and getting ready to go to bed, the children began getting sick. They were vomiting and having issues, and she was starting to feel ill herself and found herself in the bathroom having problems. And the only thing that she could think of was she had made tuna salad, and they had stopped at a roadside park on the way up, and she thought, I bet the mayonnaise went bad, or the tuna was bad, and we've got food poisoning. So one of her older daughters had not had any of this tuna salad, so she remembers calling for Nancy. Nancy, because she figured Nancy didn't have any. Nancy could kind of help take care of everybody, go for help. Nancy never came, and when my mother woke up 3 days later, she found herself in the hospital. You see, that cabin that she was so excited about being in had just received a new refrigerator a few days before, and it was run on gas. The fumes had filled the house when they had shut it up that evening, and all of them began getting sick. She asked for her children. She said, "Where are my kids?" when she woke up. And they told her they're with the angels. She had 5 children, 3 girls, and she lost 4 of them. Her youngest son survived, who was 4 years old at the time, and all the rest of them passed away. So now she's back home after a few weeks with her husband and her 1 little boy, and the bad marriage got worse. She ended up divorced, and she found herself remarried to a man named Zara, and they moved to northern Michigan in Kalkaska. You know, the 2 of them were excited to start a new life. She kind of wanted to put the tragedy behind her, and they thought they would have children together. But my mother suffered many miscarriages and was not able to have any more children. Now in Kalkaska, they owned a restaurant, and they had lots of different employees in town, including her son, who, when he turned 18, moved up to Kalkaska as well to be one of the chefs. So you think life's moved on, it's gone past, can't have any more kids, but I'm going to just enjoy what I have, enjoy my new husband, have my son working alongside of me. Well, one of the employees that she had, her name was Margaret. And actually, Margaret's my birth mother. Margaret was the one who had me. And Margaret's story is a little bit opposite of Ursula's. She was probably 30 years younger, and she grew up in Texas. She was an American girl, country girl, and she was actually the oldest of many children. She was very quiet, unlike Ursula, who likes to have a great party and invite people over. Margaret was very quiet. She kept to herself, and she actually suffered from mental illness, and it kept her very much as a loner. She grew up in Texas and just would walk around town and to escape the abusive family that she grew up in. And one day, she met a man by the name of Gale. Gale also had some handicaps and was a bit slow, but he was quiet and left Margaret to herself when she needed that time and accepted Margaret the way she was. So the 2 of them got married and found their way back to Kalkaska. So Margaret worked for my mom, Ursula, at the restaurant and washed dishes. Gale loved meeting with people, and he would often get rides into town because they owned a small house outside of the town. And Margaret would ride her bike or she would walk. She didn't want to take a ride from anybody, but she would get back and forth to where she needed to go. One night, though, Margaret was really late getting home from work. And Gale was starting to get a little bit worried because she was usually home by then and really didn't care to be out past dark that long. And eventually, she came through the door quite upset. He asked her what was wrong, and she admitted that someone had raped her on the way home that evening. Of course, you know, Gale tried to go to the police the next day and tried to figure out what happened, and was very upset about the whole encounter as well. Now, I'd like to stop here for a minute and talk about rape. Rape is a very traumatic occurrence. We hear politicians and different people say, though, that the exception for abortion should be if a woman is raped. It's funny because I'll be sitting on the couch at home, and I'll be watching a news conference, and the topic of abortion will come up, and they'll say that. They'll say, well, you know, but if a woman's raped, abortion is okay. And I'll be sitting there going, hello, I'm still here. My mother was raped. My father was a rapist. And I'm still beautiful and gorgeous, and I'm here, and I contribute to my society. Hello? But the reality is, it is traumatic. It is something awful. It is something that the woman didn't want to happen to her. You know, I actually told my story at a place once, and a man came up to me afterwards, and he said, you know, I like to go hiking out in the woods and some extreme terrain, and I'll have like my little pop-up tent and all my survival gear. And he's like, you know, if someone were to come into the tent in the middle of the night, beat me up, assault me, and I get knocked out, if I woke up the next morning and I found a baby in the tent with me, he said, as hard as it is sometimes to get into the places where I hike, he said, I would take that baby and protect that baby with all that I could and bring that baby to safety. And I thought about that because I had never thought of it that way before, but I thought it was interesting that a man would say that if an innocent life was placed in his hands, he would do whatever he could to protect that child. I have always said that a woman who has been raped needs counseling first and foremost. Before she can think about life-altering decisions, she needs to come to grips with what's happened to her. It's just like if you're grieving a loss or you're dealing with abuse, first and foremost, you need counseling. You need to decide and really come to grips with what's happened to you and what you're going to do. And I think that as they go through the stages of grief and begin to think clearly, that those who really are pushing for abortion first are not acknowledging what she's gone through. And they're saying that, I know you've been abused, but let's also place that baby on your heart forever. So I always caution people when they talk about this subject to think about the whole woman, to think about what she's going to be thinking about 10 years from now, 20 years from now, and let's make sure she gets counseling before she makes the decision that she needs to make. In my case, abortion was not an option for Gail and Margaret. They just thought life is life. Margaret's pregnant, she's going to have a baby. For Gail, as Margaret's husband, he wanted to protect her honor, and so even though he had told close family about what happened, and that's who's told me my birth story, the town, as far as they knew, thought that Gail and Margaret were having a baby. And so he was very excited about that. And when she actually went into the hospital to have me, Gail, who didn't drive and would need rides from people, went to Ursula, the restaurant owner, and asked her if she would give him a ride to the hospital to visit Margaret, to visit the baby. Once they got there, of course, Ursula's like, yeah, I want to go check out a new baby. Who doesn't want to go see a new baby? We're so cute when we're first born. And so Ursula gave Gail a ride to the hospital. And when they arrived there, the nurses told him that Margaret had to stay for a while. It was very traumatic for her with her mental illness. She needed to stay a few more days. But the baby was fine, and he could take the baby home. Now, for Gail, this was traumatic thought. Me and a baby at my house. I don't think that's going to happen. So he turned to Ursula and said, well, can you take the baby home until we figure out what to do? Now let's think about this for a minute. Okay, you're about 50 years old. You've lost all of your daughters. You tried having more children, you couldn't. And someone's saying, hey, would you like to take this baby home? Even if it's just for one day, who would say no to that? She was like, of course I'll take the baby home. I'd love to take this baby home. So even though she didn't have anything at home to take care of a baby, she decided that she would take me home and figure it out. And so she stopped at a girlfriend's house who had had some young children and to borrow a few things. And this is before the cell phones, mind you. So she calls up her husband, you know, that man I told you she remarried, Zara, and says, oh, hey, honey, bringing a surprise home. He's like, a surprise? You better not be bringing home a baby. And she's like, well, you'll see. And of course, as soon as he saw how cute I was, I wrapped him around my little baby finger right away, and he was smitten. And I quickly entered his house, her heart in his home, and they took me in as their own. Now, of course, the state was involved because, honestly, I was Margaret's daughter, and they were trying to figure out what was the best thing. And so they asked Zara and Ursula, they're like, well, can you help her with the baby? We need to make sure that she's visiting her parents. And so I would go there for a day or so, and they would call, and they would be like, Mary won't stop crying, we don't know what to do. So Zara and Ursula would drive back to their house and find that my pants hadn't been changed all day, that all the bottles they had left hadn't been used, and I was hungry and dirty and just needed to go back with them. So then the state tried a different approach, and they said, well, you've tried teaching her at her home, you've tried having her stay there. What if you take Margaret into your house and you train her? Maybe she'll see how you're doing it. So they said, okay. They wanted what was best for me, to be with my mother, and so they invited Margaret to come live with them for a while. And again, I would be in the bedroom crying, and finally Ursula couldn't take it anymore, and she'd open the door and go in there, and Margaret would be laying on the bed with a pillow over her head, unable to even cope with the situation. So I went back and forth for a while, but by the time I was 5 years old, Sarah and Ursula adopted me, and I was legally their child. Now, of course, this has been a wonderful restoration for Ursula, because she had lost 3 of her daughters. And all you men out there, you're wonderful sons, I'm sure. But us women, when it's time to go to the prom, we don't just pick out the black tux. We go to the shop after shop after shop to find the perfect dress. When it's time to get married, we involve our moms in everything. When it's time to have those grandbabies, we call them up and say, Mom, what name do you think I should use? So for my mother, Ursula, she loved having a little girl again. She loved being a part of our lives. After my dad passed away a few years ago, we take her on vacations with us. She's always wanted to go to Niagara Falls. So of course, the daughter says, come on, let's go. We'll take you to Niagara Falls. So it's been a wonderful restoration for her to go from losing those children and the heartbreak of miscarriage after miscarriage to an opportunity to have a girl come into her life. Adoption can sometimes be depicted, however, with Hollywood and with different things, as something negative. A lot of times I watch movies where someone's adopted and when they find out, it's this huge traumatic thing. They're usually an adult and they find out, and even though their parents loved them forever, now they're rejecting them, and you were never my parents. And for me, it was never that way. For me, I was very glad to be alive. I didn't feel abandoned. And I think for part of it for me was because it was an open adoption. I knew from a young age exactly what had happened. And so whenever I talk to people that are facing the situation, I always advocate for an open adoption, as open as you can be with the child, just so the child doesn't have something traumatic happen to them as an adult when they find out, but rather they hear about it when they're young and they can process it as the age allows. I had 2 wonderful, loving sets of parents. I had one set who cared for me and raised me, and I had another set who were superheroes and made the right decision when it mattered most. So as an adult, I've communicated with my parents, my birth parents. I've been able to connect with my mother's family in Texas through the internet and email and calls. And I've even been able to be with Gail in his later years as he got ill and was sick. I was able to visit him in the hospital and talk to him. And I remember the last time I visited him and I knew he was getting really ill, I remember holding his hand and looking him in the eyes and telling him, thank you. Thank you for when it mattered most, you stepped up as my dad to make sure that the adoption went through with Ursula and Zara. Even though he wasn't able to care for me as an infant, he was able to make the right decisions to make sure that I ended up where I needed to be. And I was raised well and am doing wonderful now as an adult. So I was very thankful for him. And when he passed away, not only was Margaret there, but my adopted mom, Ursula, was with me all the way through. She was there to hold my hand when people came. She was there to be with me. And so for me, having 2 sets of parents has been a wonderful thing, and I've been very blessed because of it. Now, as a mom, I've had to deal with life issues. My oldest son, Matthew, came when I was almost 20. I was 19 years old, had been married for over a year. And right away, after I found out I was pregnant, I began spotting and having bleeding issues. And they initially told me I was having a miscarriage, but after getting an ultrasound, they found out there was problems with the placenta. And all along, the doctors kept asking me, well, we could end this. Sometimes if you have problems this early on, the baby doesn't do well. And of course, I said, no, my parents didn't end me. I'm not going to end this life. If something happens, then something happens, but I'm going to fight for the life inside me for as long as I possibly can. At about 27 weeks, still in my 2nd trimester, Matthew was born. He was 1.5 pounds. He was a whole month behind in size. And as they were getting ready to deliver him, the doctor, again, another doctor came up to me and said, what we can do is just let nature take its course. And being 19 and naive, I'm like, oh, well, what does that mean? Well, instead of doing any medical intervention, we'll just wrap him up in a blanket and we'll put him in your arms and you can just love on him and hold him until he passes away. And of course I said no. I said, I want you to intercede on my son's behalf in any way possible. After a few more years went by, I honestly thought about what that doctor had said to me, and I wish I would have had the sense to look him in the eye and say, well now, sir, if your appendix is about to burst, should we let nature take its course? Because naturally, we wouldn't do surgery and cut out your appendix. And of course, he probably would have said, well, no, I'm going to do whatever medically is possible to save my life. And I don't think he could comprehend as a mother why I wanted everything medically possible to happen for my son to save his life. I'm very proud to say that Matthew is 14 years old, an honor student. He's in band, he loves swimming, and he's just an all-around polite, wonderful young man. And I'm so glad that when I had the opportunity to fight for him, that I did. When I talked to my 14-year-old and my daughter about pregnancy and growing up and the birds and the bees, you know what, I never tell them, if you get pregnant, I'm going to disown you. If you get pregnant, you're going to have to make that bed that you messed up. I'm not going to help you. I never say that to them because, you know, I volunteered in the pregnancy care centers before, and the girls that consider abortion, the girls that are upset the most, usually are the ones that say, I can't tell my mom. I can't tell my dad. They've told me 100 times they would disown me. They've warned me against this. They're never going to forgive me. I can't tell them. And I think that's sad because all that love I had for that little tiny peanut, I still have for them even when they make me mad. So I tell my kids, look, are you going to be ready for a baby when you're in high school? Probably not. Are you going to be ready for a baby freshman year of college? Probably not. But if it happens, know that I'm going to be there for you. Plan to wait. Do everything that you can in your own power to make right choices. We tell them that with everything, with crossing the street. Look both ways. Don't run out there and get smacked by a semi. Look both ways. But I want my children to know that if you don't look and you get hit by a truck, I'm still going to take you to the hospital. I'm still going to help care for you. And it's the same thing if you get pregnant. I think so many times as parents, we're so quick to be harsh with our children that when they find themselves in those situations, they get scared and they turn to the place that says, I won't tell mom, we'll just take care of it. And then what do we find out? We have 30-year-old, 40-year-old, 50-year-old. We had one woman who was over 60 years old that came into the pregnancy care center one day, visibly upset. She was there to help with an ad in the yellow pages. She was very upset. And come to find out, she had had an abortion many, many years ago. She thought she'd forgotten about it, but that baby was still on her heart. So I educate my children. I talk to them about the big issues. And I'm always surprised even when I talk to friends or to young people and find out that they have no idea about some of the big issues going on in our government, the big issues that happen in our communities. And I ask them, just educate yourself. Find out, why people advocate the way they do. Find out the truth about what happens to people who make those choices 20 years down the road. Don't judge them. They're hurting. We need to love them. But we need to make sure that people are educated. I'm always like, adoption, hello, it worked out here, worked for me. So, see, I always tell people they should speak up. They shouldn't be afraid to tell people how they feel or to try to educate others. But you see, speaking up has always been in my family. You see, in Nazi Germany, many people knew what was going on with the government. Many people understood what Hitler was doing. And my mom talks about stories that happened during that time. She'll tell stories of being out in the fields and the airplanes fighting each other. and soldiers having to parachute out. She talks about the soldiers having to come and take over their home to use it as a headquarters. And she even has the scars to show me and talk about the day a Russian soldier had come to the house. So my mother was very smart, and she spoke Russian, and she spoke a few other languages besides, and she understood what he was saying. He was saying, "Get on the bed, get on the bed." He had cornered her in the bedroom. And she pretended like she couldn't understand what he was saying and hoping that he would leave her alone. And he went to go push her down, and he was grabbing for his gun, and it went off, and she got shot in the leg. Of course, when the shot went off, the other officers in the home rushed to see what had happened, and when they realized that he was about to rape this young girl, they left and left her for dead, laying there on the bed. Thank goodness my grandfather arrived soon after that and took her down to the local doctor, and she got patched up. But you see, she lived in an era where tragedy was happening all around them. And many of them didn't speak up. My mother, because she was so smart and could speak different languages and had passed all of her tests in Europe at that time, she could go on to higher education. And she was very excited because she was very athletic, and she wanted to go on to become a gym teacher. But you see, my grandfather, even though he had said things when he could, the Nazi Party was already in control, and he had seen what they had done to the school books. He had seen the deception that Hitler had used with these young people, blaming things on the Jewish race. And he did not agree with that. He had lived during some of those things and knew that it was not because of the Jews that they had gone through depression, and he knew the truth. And while he could not stop Hitler from drafting his sons into the war, he would stop his daughter from being brainwashed by this political party. And he told her, no, you're not going on to become a school teacher. They're not going to teach you the truth. You'll be teaching young people lies. You are not allowed to go. And the teachers and the principal of her school were very confused. They're like, this is an honor. She's brilliant. She can speak all these different languages. She can speak Latin. Why would you not allow your daughter to go on to higher education? And they actually were so upset, they called him into a school meeting and were trying to convince him. Peer pressure. A lot of us have gone through that. And you know what my grandfather did? He pounded his fist on that table and he said, she will not go. Hitler has taken my sons, he will not take my daughter. So he would not be silent. My mother, she ended up going on and becoming a seamstress, and eventually met her American soldier and came to America. But my grandfather would not be silent. My aunt would sneak food and blankets into the factory to the Jews who had been forced to work there. And I find it interesting that they did all the little things that they could do, and they said what they could say to their friends. But you know, they were stifled by the time and era of how much of a change they could make. But we don't have those stifles. We have freedom. We have freedom to speak up. We have freedom to say, I'm not going to go along with peer pressure. That yes, it's a woman's choice, but has she been educated or has she been brainwashed? Have we been brainwashed? Or do we need to know the truth? Do we need to know that every baby has a right to live a wonderful life? I'm thankful that I'm here, and I'm thankful for my husband and my beautiful children and all the lives that I've affected, that God had a purpose and a plan for me. So thank you very much for coming and listening to me tonight. And I just challenge you to tell my story, to let people know that life is worth fighting for. So thank you.